Louis Vuitton.
House of Vuitton.
Stephen Sprouse.
Stephen Sprouse.
Stephen.
Stephen was an artist who also was a fashion designer.
He was the biggest thing.
It's changed the landscape of fashion.
The king of graffiti, Stephen Sprouse.
His vision was so deep, sharp, and vibrant.
Rock and roll.
Prolific.
All the details were in there.
A one-man signature.
It's Hitchcock.
He wanted Andy Warhol and Iggy Pop and Debbie Harry to be wearing his clothing.
He influences everybody today.
Who's that boy? Who's that Stephen Sprouse?
I was looking for a new apartment in Paris, and I went to see this apartment, which at the time was being rented. It was on the Rue du Bac by Charlotte Gainsbourg. And she had a trunk, she was breastfeeding her child at the time in her bedroom when I first met her. And she had a trunk by her bed of Vuitton, which was painted black. And some of the black paint had come off to reveal the monogram. And I asked her about this trunk, and she said it had belonged to her father, Serge, and he had painted it black. And I thought this was very cool, very punky, and very anarchic, you know, the idea of covering up this monogram. I had this idea to kind of deface the monogram, and I wanted to do that with graffiti, which to me was always a kind of defiant act and a rebellious act and an anarchic act, but also something that creates a new surface and a new meaning with something old. So I thought whose hand and whose graffiti would mean something to me, and of course I went back to Stephen, who had always used graffiti.
So everything started with in a meeting with Marc, where he came to see me and said, I've been studying the history of the house, and painting the initials of the clients on the trunks was since the beginning. And he said, I would like to renew that tradition, but of course, today you don't only put the initials. The way of writing in a modern way is the graffiti, and the king of graffiti is Stephen Sprouse. So what do you think if we had a collaboration with Stephen, where he could use our traditional iconic bags and just help us printing graffiti on it?
A new way of promoting Vuitton that was disrespectful and respectful at the same time.
That was the beauty of that. It was two great Americans in Paris using the luxury of the Paris manufacturing and the House of Vuitton and bringing it into like, here you go. We're gonna have some fun with you.
Stephen and I really bonded and became very close friends during his time here, and he also became very close to the whole team and staff of the design room, at Louis Vuitton.
I really remember the 8 days he spent in our office, painting graffiti on the walls with his cap on the head. I mean, that was, it's quite fascinating to realize that he lived in our office for more than a week.
Marc Jacobs' collaboration with Stephen Sprouse was genius, because Marc Jacobs was able to bring Stephen Sprouse to everyone. And basically, those graffiti bags were in every magazine. They were such a hit. Everybody wanted them. There was a waiting list for them. And all of a sudden, everybody knew who Stephen Sprouse was, because they knew that Stephen Sprouse had done the graffiti on the Vuitton bags.
It was great. I was so happy to see Stephen. I was really happy for that. And it looked fantastic. And I loved how Marc just had the balls to do it.
he could have hired an art director or an illustrator to do a Sprouse-like graffiti. But I think bringing Stephen in as an artist was very brave on his part and very generous.
That marriage was wonderful. You know, two boys, two fun boys, two extremely creative and special boys. I mean, they are the special boys of New York.
Stephen Sprouse was always a real fixture in New York nightlife and in New York City as an artist and as a fashion designer and as a personality and a presence. And when he started showing his clothes, I became very aware of him and his whole entourage, which included Stephen Meisel, Terry Toy, Debbie Harry, et cetera, et cetera.
I think in a way it was a smaller world then, and there was much more interaction between different fields. All the photographers, all the fashion people, all the artists, all the musicians, actors, you know, everybody sort of all hung out together.
This was a really small community. Everyone talks about that they were in New York, part of the scene, but we were there, and I can tell you there was maybe 60 people tops who were involved in these scenes.
I think for the group of us, we never realized that, but we did go to clubs in which art was happening, like a Keith Haring and Basquiat. I mean, they were not unattainable people. They were friends, or they were people you were hanging out with. Nothing was precious. You were just up, or you went out at 11 o'clock and stayed up till 3 and 4 in the morning, because you were absorbing so much from each other. There was no agenda. It was something that was happening. We were not aware how great we were.
We're going down the club tonight. We're gonna get what we want and get it all right. We let it rip until the early dawn, and we won't stop until we are on.
You know, it's sort of like a caste system, but you know, everyone was learning from what Andy did, and everyone that was part of that scene, they were really people that grew up watching Andy Warhol and idolizing Andy Warhol and coming to New York for it. So, you know, it was a great mixed scene, and Stephen was the fashion part of it.
It was a high energy period, a very creative time. There was no money involved. I think that maybe was part of the excitement of it. It wasn't really a super commercial period. You know, New York City was bankrupt.
People didn't have to work like crazy to pay their rent. People were able to pay their rent, and then they were able to do creative things. And I think that allowed so many people that could do creative items which normally they wouldn't have been able to if it was in the same economy state that we're in today.
In those days, definitely much more so than now. I would imagine there is a version of it now as well, but not as spontaneous as it was then. It was purely spontaneous friendships.
Run into the sun, my love, the sun, my love with you. Run, baby, go run. Run after the sun. Run, baby, go run.
Stephen and I met when we moved into this building. At the time, Debbie Harry was living in the building, and Stephen moved into the building in the second floor. So it became sort of a very rock and roll building, and there were all kinds of people walking in and out. And Steve and I would lurk in the elevator to see Mick Jagger come up or see David Bowie pick up Debbie.
Just by living together in the same building, he knew who I was, and suddenly he came up to me and he said, "Oh, here, wear these boots, and you know, wear this and wear that."
It was in the middle of the 70s when we had just moved in here, and one evening a good friend of ours came over one night and said, "I have a friend who wants a haircut." And that was around the time when I had given Karen the shave on one side and the flop in the front, coming from the standard bob. And he wanted the same thing.
Stephen painted his entire apartment silver, and he would just come up here with a piece of luggage and draw and create and make me stand up and be a fitting model, you know, play music for me. Countless evenings he would draw the dress I should be wearing, make it, and he would also draw my hair. He would say, now this is how you should wear your hair. I mean, he was very dictator about it for a shy person.
Never been singing songs every night. A wannabe star under cheap disco lights.
We had this thing where we'd go to the supermarket and make a cake, a crappy $5 cake. But the thing was always, he would say, okay, well, we gotta get, you know, white icing, and then we gotta find the food coloring. But the food coloring, you know, there were 5 things. It was more than enough for 20 cakes in one thing. But we had to get at least 3 of those because the colors would never be deep enough for him. So it was like so technicolor, this cake, you know, the outside was so lime green that, like, you know, the FDA probably says, you know, you're only allowed to use this much, so this much comes in a case, but we would combine 50 of them to make the colors extraordinary. And then you'd cut into it, and then it was purple on the inside. I mean, it was like so insane, these cakes, but they were so much fun to make. Yeah. And they were so Steve. Everything was so Steve.
Some people see more than others, and I do think he did. He could see in the room much more than any of us could. He could see a profile, a silhouette, a sound, a hair that he thought was cool. Looking at his hands was fascinating for me because they had content of everything, you know. The way he drew his markers, you know, took numbers on his skin. Everything about that was very hands-on, very raw.
Because there was something just so spontaneously direct about the way he handled that pen.
Maybe the one thing that astounded me the most was seeing sketches that Stephen made when he was a high school student in Minnesota, and how talented he already was, how he already had the hand and this incredible vision, mature vision, even as a little kid.
It was his signature. He didn't follow anyone's trend.
Stephen's work was always super dynamic and very, you know, very New York. You know, he worked in fluorescent colors. He had lots of rock and roll imagery. There was a certain androgyny, a certain New York sort of style, very Warhol-based, factory-oriented, 60s sort of admiration that he had for lots of personalities that had come before him that I had also admired. And yeah, from the start, when he started doing clothes, I was a big fan of what he did, and I wore a lot of his clothes and collected a lot of his clothes.
For example, I don't know, like the Dayglow orange, skinny gabardine coat. You know, I could see that coat like walking in the East Village with all that gray and black, and then there's some graffiti over there, and then along comes this, you know, cat in the coat, so this whole scene becomes one like comic book. It lifts up from reality just enough, not out of reality, but just to see another dimension of this reality. So to describe it physically, you know, he used bold colors against black.
They were extremely sexy clothing in these super shocking colors that weren't really used for clothing yet. They were used on uniforms for, you know, for garbage men.
Well, it was very, very downtown, very young, very youthful, very rock and roll. very counterculture.
Stephen's clothing was for a very limited market. The people who wanted to wear his clothing couldn't afford to wear his clothing. The people who could afford to wear his clothing weren't brave enough or daring enough to wear it.
He elevated the idea of what was streetwear into something that was considered high fashion. He worked in the finest fabrics, had beautiful quality workmanship, and he did things that were not based on cost or commerciality. He did things that were based on pure aesthetic and an expression of an idea.
And from what we heard, Stephen never compromised. If a buyer wanted to buy something that he had made in Dayglow green and they had asked for him to make the same thing in brown, he wouldn't do it.
He never made cuts that were more, contemporary just to try to fit into the style, to try to sell more or, mute his colors. He never really did that.
Stephen's aesthetic, his style, never really changed. The way, fashion people will, this is the next big thing, and this is, and their collections vary. And Stephen's varied, but he always had this very kind of specific look, and fashion kind of would come around in circles. Instead of him changing for fashion, fashion would then come around and then he was big again, But then he kept the course and they would go off, fashion would be into other things and then they'd come around and there he was, Stephen again.
And it's very inspiring to see somebody that for so long was able to hold on to his vision and what he really liked. And to realize that if you do that, there's a place for you. Just keep doing it. Don't worry about it. Keep doing it.
Oh yeah.
It opened, I guess it was the fall of '87, 3-story former firehouse, huge store. 3 levels.
Each floor was a different price point. So the first floor, which is what we could afford. The second floor was the Sprouse line. And that was a little bit more designer range. And the third floor was the Stephen Sprouse line. So as you got up, you got more of his name. The store just had this fabulous energy to it, and there were music videos playing, and you couldn't even talk in the store. The music was so loud, deafening punk music. And all the people that worked there were really cool.
If the clothing was camouflage, the floors, the ceilings, the walls were all painted Dayglow camouflage. So everything worked. And when you walked into a section of his store, it was like walking into a painting or walking into that artwork.
People would go just for curiosity. And for me, I would go there just to hang out because, like on the weekends, even though I wasn't working, I'd just go and see what was going on. And
You know you're all that I want. You know I'm all that you need. For me there is no other. You'll always be my lover.
And then when Stephen came on the scene, he did his 1984 show, and that was like a rock concert.
The music was loud. The Altic Lansing speakers were bigger than the biggest you could get. He was gonna drown you out. It was sweaty, hot, electric.
And it was like insane amount of photographers. The models like walked out and were bumping into each other like they were in nightclubs. And Terry Toy, who was transgendered, opened the show and set the tone for it. And it was really like, it took you away from those shows where the models would come out holding a number.
The girls were real people. The casting was what he liked, not what an agency was pushing. It was definitely a one-man signature.
One moment I would be at Calvin, next moment at Donna, next moment at Blast, and you'd be jumping from all these different personalities, but these corporate structures into a situation of Steve where it was just a bunch of kids sitting on the floor trying to figure out how to do this with Steve as the godfather over everything.
He was the photographer. He was the hair. He sewed the costume. He did the makeup. He did the backdrop, and he did the picture. Because he saw this whole picture in the way he saw it, and he just wanted to get that.
Listen to the music now, watch me go.
His line of clothing over the years has become very collectible. People that have, have it from years past, adore it and still wear it. It's timeless in a way.
It's artwork. You're you're investing into a piece of art, and it transcends fashion. Fashion is something that's fleeting, and you wear it for 6 months and then you buy something else. I don't think anyone that bought the Stephen Sprouse, Louis Vuitton, Marc Jacobs collaboration bags a couple of years ago, I don't think anyone has thrown them out or resold them. I think they keep them. I think the new Vuitton products that Marc is doing with Stephen's artwork is it's going to be much more of a collector's thing.
I did my best in a very first-degree way to imitate what I think Stephen would have done or has done in terms of fashion. And so I took very basic pieces like the Balmacan that he always loved, and we put the monogram inside and we put his graffiti over it, or we made a little t-shirt dress with a singular engineered print in fluorescent colors. The sneakers or the trainers that look kind of like ski boots, like basketball sneakers, ski boots, futuristic, Velcro. I tried to use the things in Stephen's vocabulary and give it the shape, silhouette, and styling that Stephen would have done when he was at the top of his game, in terms of fashion and designing. So it really is a complete homage and a complete combination of what is Vuitton and what is this legendary icon, and then what are the icons and the lasting aesthetics that Stephen left in the fashion world.
What Marc has done with Vuitton is make clothing art. And I think that a lot of people will be buying it to display in their houses. They may take it out once or twice to someplace really special, but they're going to keep it on their laps. They're not going to, coat check it.
Graffiti is a clear homage to the work that has been done some years ago and to the success incredible that we had with this graffiti on our monogram. And as far as the rose is concerned, for us it's even more important because it's their real innovation. It's a print which is inspired by a rose that he was used to design to his friends when in occasion where he wanted to thank them. And it's a symbol of his way of living, and we are particularly happy to bring it in our product.
So we felt very close from Stephen, and when he died, we were sad. We took contact with the family and helped the foundation. But then when the Ditch Gallery said that they wanted to do a retrospective of his work, which is more, of course, than the graffiti. I mean, he's a full artist, has been exploring a lot of areas of creativity and creation. We were very excited, and we think that for us, one of the best homage we could do is to make Stephen live again through a full line of products.
This school of Stephen, of me, of all of us, is not dead. So even though the vast majority of the society has been marginalized, there is still that intelligent, soulful, well-meaning group of people who will, always stay at the course.
When you're looking at, a certain advertising, the creative brain behind that advertisement isn't a person who did it. It's Stephen Sprouse, or it's Keith Haring, or it's Kenny Sharp, or it's Ann Magnuson. There are people who inspired it.
So I think his influence was then and is still heartfelt as something that is inspiring, no matter whether it is the 80s, the 90s, the next century, because there was something in it that still lives and is still valid today.
What he did at the time was style with a lot of substance. And what we're doing now is we're paying homage to that style. The substance is different because we're in a different period of time. But the fact that it has a lasting visual effect, the fact that it's changed the landscape of fashion is really what creates a legacy or something that's classic,
And he influences everybody today. He is not gone. He's having an exhibition. He exists. Picasso exists, doesn't he? Saint Laurent exists. His entire collection, everybody was channeling Saint Laurent. When you're that powerful, you don't disappear. You exist.
He would love the fact that there's a show with his artwork. He was always making art, and you know, people are always coming at him from the fashion side of things, or the fashion, blurring the line, fashion, rock, fashion, art. But to have paintings in a gallery would, you know, he'd be thrilled. It's not the first time, but a gallery like Deitch, he would love it.
Many dimensions here make it more challenging, but make a retrospective much more interesting. Okay, so this is not going to be like a fashion museum type retrospective with 30 models with clothes on them. No, not at all. You know, there will be some models with some of Stephen's designs, but there will be his paintings, there will be videos, there will be a musical soundtrack. So it's a much more exciting situation.
We are like a worldwide loudspeaker, and if with a little bit of delay the world discovers the genius of Stephen, I think we'll be happy.
Rock art and fashion were always my favorite things in that order. But I don't know how to play anything, so I have to work on the other two.